frustrated with something and you thought, but that's just who I am. I can't help it. If so, that might be why you attracted this video to you. Welcome to another dojo topic. We had a really exciting conversation in the live dojo today, and I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see what we talked about. And remember, you're welcome to join us live any Tuesday that you like. We'd love for you to be there. And just a reminder before we begin, nothing shared in this dojo is meant to become a rule, belief, or teaching you must follow. All of our topics are simply perspectives offered for awareness. You are always invited to take what resonates and release anything that doesn't, because your inner wisdom is the final authority. Last week, we talked about intensity is the invitation to remember what you are. And what we meant by that was intensity. You know, when you feel those intense emotions, feelings, and you feel like that's the moment something's going wrong. Well, it's actually the invitation to remember something's going very right. And if you were unable to join us live last week or you haven't yet seen the video, I'll put a link to that video at the end of this video. For today, we're talking about the invitations that create identity. Because you know, you are the sovereign observer, right? Today, we're exploring something fascinating, the invitations that create identity based on you as the sovereign observer. Most people believe identity is something solid, something formed by our past, our roles, and our experiences. But we live in an inverse universe, and identity is being recreated moment by moment by the invitations we continue to accept. Now, if you've been following any of these videos, you've heard me refer to the mind as an attic, or if you've read my book, Secrets in the Attic. And it's where we've stored all kinds of things over the years. Memories, experiences, interpretations of what happened in our lives. And before we begin, I'd like you to consider something for a moment. If you look back over your life, you'll probably notice that it naturally unfolds in stages: childhood, young adulthood, relationships, careers, new beginnings. And with each stage, an identity quietly takes shape. For the first 17 years of my life, I was living the identity of childhood. During those years, boxes were quietly being packed in the attic. Boxes labeled family expectations, who I needed to be, what love looked like, how the world worked. And like most children, I didn't realize I was helping pack those boxes. I simply accepted the invitations that came with them. Invitations about who I was supposed to be, how life worked, and what my place in the story was. Then a new chapter of life began. For the next 32 years, marriage created another identity that slowly took shape. Wife, partner, part of a we. New boxes were added to the attic during that chapter. Boxes labeled responsibility, partnership, loyalty, what it meant to build a life together. And again, many of those invitations were accepted so naturally, they simply became part of the identity I believed I was. Then that chapter ended. The marriage dissolved, and suddenly something fascinating happened. Not just externally, but internally. Because when something that has defined you for decades disappears, you begin to see how much identity was quietly built around it. At first, it felt as though something had been taken from me. And that's not to say that I went through it lightly. Oh, man, ups and downs like a roller coaster. Just, it was a very interesting ride. But as realization deepened, a new introduction became clear. Much of what I had believed myself to be was not something permanent. It was a collection of invitations I had been accepting for many years. Invitations about who I was, invitations about how life works, invitations about what my story meant. And when I began to observe those invitations, instead of automatically accepting them, something unexpected happened. Space appeared, peace appeared, and where identity once felt fixed, possibility appeared. Because when identity loosens, awareness begins to reveal why life is still extending new invitations. For all those years, what I had thought to be my identity had been created by the labels I had given them: childhood, marriage, wife, mother, career, homeowner. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. All of these labels were simply experiences until the mind gave them a name. Pleasant and unpleasant are just the mind's way of deciding which invitations it wants to keep and which ones it wants to reject. But you are not the mind. You are the sovereign observer. That's when I began to realize something important. Those thoughts, those emotions, those interpretations, they were invitations. And for most of my life, I had automatically accepted them. But in that moment of intensity, I saw something new. I could see that I was not the story. I was the one observing the story. Because think about it. If you look back over your life at any stage in your life, if you think about yourself as a child or where you worked or your marriage, your relationships, whatever you're thinking about, one thing is always constant. What is observing those memories and those experiences? The observer. You, as the sovereign being, are the observer of all of these experiences. That is the common denominator through everything. And here's where the universe revealed something fascinating. The mind said, you should fix this. You should fight this. You should make it different. But the more I simply observed what was arising instead of wrestling with it, something surprising happened. Peace began to appear. Clarity began to appear. And eventually, possibility began to appear. That's when I realized something profound. The universe doesn't respond the way we were taught. It often works in reverse. In the dualistic world, we're taught, fix it, control it, make it go away, wrestle it to the ground, try to figure it out. But the awakened being begins to see the opposite is often true. When we stop fighting the experience, when we allow ourselves to be the sovereign observer, life begins to reorganize itself in ways we couldn't see before. All of those endings were simply a stage in the life of Nancy. It was a moment to see how identities are constructed and how I, as the sovereign observer, can label it as something disastrous or a magical opportunity. Life is constantly presenting invitations, and the sovereign observer realizes she can accept them or not. What I began to see in those months after the divorce was something fascinating. Have you noticed how many times I've used the word fascinating today? So much of this is just fascinating to me. The identity of wife, the identity of being part of a couple, the identity of who I thought I was in that life wasn't actually living somewhere inside me. It was being recreated over and over again by the invitations the mind kept presenting. Every day, there were new invitations. Thoughts like, you're alone now. You lost something. This isn't the life you imagined. And each thought came with a feeling, almost like a pull to step back into that identity. And then one day I saw something really clearly. The identity wasn't just created over 32 years. It was being maintained by the invitations I kept accepting. Something extraordinary happens the moment you see that an identity is maintained by the invitations you accept. You don't actually have to accept every invitation your mind offers. You can simply observe it. Oh, there's that thought again. Oh, there's that story. And the moment you observe it without automatically accepting, the identity begins to diminish. This is where it becomes interesting for all of us, because every one of us has identities we've built over time. Maybe it's, I'm the responsible one. I'm the one who holds everything together. I'm the one who struggles. I'm the one who always gets hurt. I'm the one who should be in charge. But here's the question the sovereign observer begins to ask. Are those identities actually fixed? Or are they simply being maintained by the invitations we keep accepting? And here's where the universe reveals its inverse nature. The mind thinks the way to change an identity is to fight it or fix it. But the moment you stop accepting every invitation that reinforces the identity begins to dissolve on its own. No forcing, no fixing. And remember, if you've watched any videos in the past, you'll know that the way to stop reinforcing the invitations, stop reinforcing the identity, is by stopping and no longer using the personal language. Stop using the personal language. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm tired. My head hurts. When you're personalizing it with words like I, me, my, and mine, that's when you're accepting the invitations. The sovereign observer doesn't fight the invitations of the mind. She simply becomes aware that she is the one deciding which invitations she accepts and which invitations she declines. Life is constantly sending invitations, but acceptance is optional. What identity in your life might simply be a series of invitations you've been accepting for years? What might happen if you simply observe the next invitation instead of automatically saying yes? Just observe it. The less you try to change your identity, the faster it changes. The mind sends invitations all day long, but acceptance is optional. Let me ask you something to simply notice this week. How many invitations does your mind extend to you each day before you even finish your morning coffee? Maybe even before you open your eyes. Invitations like, remember who hurt you. Worry about what might go wrong today. Let's replay something from our past. How can I increase my income? How can I have more fulfilling relationships? Why does life seem to be so frustrating? Most of these invitations arrive so quietly, we don't even notice we've accepted them. And yet, each one is subtly reinforcing an identity. I think that's why I love mornings so much, because it's that opportunity to get up and smell the fresh air, see the sun coming up, and just know, oh my gosh, we're resetting our life. It's a new day, a new dawn, a new opportunity. Everything is fresh. And we can set that intention for the rest of the day, or we can jump right back into what we were worried about the day before. All of those negative invitations that we accepted from the days, weeks, months, and years before. We can choose, but every morning you have the opportunity to set your intention. Most people think identity is built by big life events, but identity is often maintained by the small invitations we keep accepting every day. Tiny thoughts, tiny reactions, tiny interpretations. Repeated long enough, they begin to feel like who we are. This week, instead of trying to change anything, simply notice the invitations. Notice the thoughts, notice the interpretations, notice the emotional pull that says, come, step back into this familiar identity. Instead, just observe, because something fascinating begins to happen when you are observing as impersonal, effortless awareness. Those invitations begin to lose their power. If you stopped accepting a particular invitation about who you are, that identity would stop being able to survive. Intensity is just an invitation. It's an invitation to remember what you are before creating the identity. Your boxes were packed a long time ago, but more often than not, those boxes don't stay in the attic. Every once in a while, the mind goes upstairs, pulls down a box, opens it, and presents you with something from inside. A memory, a story, a familiar emotional reaction. And it's almost like the mind is saying, would you like to keep this with you today? And if we automatically accept the invitation, we carry the box back downstairs and place it right in the middle of the living room. Now it's shaping how we see the day, how we see ourselves, how we see other people. And if we keep bringing the same box down over and over again, it eventually starts to feel like part of the daily experience, like it belongs there, like it's who you are. But the sovereign observer begins to notice something different. The observer sees the moment when the box appears. And instead of automatically taking it with you, there's a pause, a moment of awareness. And in that moment, something extraordinary becomes clear. You don't actually have to bring every box downstairs. Some of them can simply stay in the attic. The mind tries to convince you that the way to deal with the box is to analyze it, fix it, figure it out, rearrange it, ask yourself why it happened, wrestle with it. But when you decline the invitation, you don't bring the box into the house. And eventually, the attic becomes quieter. The sovereign observer sees the identity as just the collection of boxes we keep bringing downstairs. And awareness gently asks, is this one still needed? What box from the attic has been sitting in the middle of your living room for years, simply because you keep carrying it back downstairs? How many of your boxes have you thought were part of your identity? How many boxes have you brought downstairs from the attic so many times that they started to look like they belong there? Can you now see that those boxes were never the house? They were simply things, something you had been storing inside the house. Life is always extending invitations. Some of us, we just keep accepting them. Some of those invitations invite us to repeat old identities. Others open the door to entirely new ways of being. Whatever we're experiencing, we are not the invitations. We are the sovereign observer aware of which invitations we choose to accept or decline. Remember, life is all about choices. You can choose to be a victim or you can choose to be the sovereign observer. Whatever you decide, the choice is yours to make. You are always invited to take what resonates with you and release anything that doesn't in any of these topics. I've put some reflection questions here. I'm not going to read them to you, but if you'd like to work on this topic a little bit farther, go ahead, pause the video and take a look at these. In the meantime, can you see how this has landed on you? Can you see how identities are formed? Do you see yourself as the sovereign observer? Just look back over anything that happened in your life. The one constant was the observer, observing everything, everything, all experiences, all memories, everything happening. If you want any kind of support with this work, visit me at masteringyourbeliefs.com. In the meantime, this is Nancy Muller, the one and only Life Sensei, saying ciao for now.